gents, and thank you for coming along, and to the organisers for putting tonight on. I won't say too much because we'll get a chance to speak at the end, I think, except to just say a bit about the process of making the film, and the fact that when I set out to make it, or before I set out to make it, sort of came about by a growing awareness of the global food system in the wake of the food crisis in 2008. Initially I found out about things like the Transition Town movement, community gardens, and was, to be honest, like a bit of a cynic, and I'd hear about these projects springing up and think basically they're basically little experiments that might make people feel a little better, but really, we're facing such big picture challenges. It's perhaps a bit of a waste of time. But in the process of making the film, and both, even along the way, sort of tangents of starting up my own garden when I was living in Newcastle, working on an organic farm, and then going and exploring this food system in South America, I saw a whole lot of projects which, individually you might be able to say are little experiments that you could be quite cynical about, but I think taken together, I came to the conclusion that we are seeing that, these as part of most certainly a global movement. Definitely it's represented in Australia. That might not be the solution right here today, but it's an embryo of it, and one that I think will, if it continues to go this way, put up a real challenge to the sort of duopoly, for example, that we see in the food system in Australia that's been really hitting the news in recent weeks. So leave that there, and we can have a bit more of a chat after the film.
Hey Simon, fantastic work. Very, very good. The country, Venezuela, third world. The other one before, I forgot. Third world. We are a first world country. We're not even seeing any of this. How do you get a change in a first world country like Australia, and with so many people who value farming, to make a constructive way to move forward without it being a catastrophic situation as the way that's changed?
Yeah, that's the enormous question we all have to try and answer every day in what we do. But you're right in saying the conditions here are very different to that in Venezuela. But I think despite that, there are some lessons that I think we can draw from that example. And I mean, it comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, like that this movement is very much underway, growing globally, but also in Australia. But I don't know. I get the feeling that in some ways it's fragmented. Everyone's doing different things, which is important. The projects that are happening on the community level, but we also need to be looking at the big picture and how we can work collectively, on a larger scale to fight for political change as well.
Just my particular point from watching the clip. One of the things that I thought it was very positive, and a lot of some great innovative schemes going on there. But one of the things that I felt was a bit disquieting was the idea that basically the whole thing seems to be running at a loss and being backed by the oil wealth of the country, and that doesn't strike me as sustainable. I mean, the only feeling is if the oil price begins to drop or if oil begins to run out, they might just scrap the idea because they can't afford to maintain it anymore, especially things like, subsidizing the cost of food and subsidizing, and creating their own chain of subsidized supermarkets and things like that. What if they may decide to go liberal at that point? Have you noticed anything to that effect in your dealings with people?
They are very much my impressions that the current way that this project is financed is unsustainable. But it's not just my impression; it's a view shared by most of the people I spoke to in Venezuela who were involved in this stuff. And I think there's a realism there that this social movement has inherited an economy that, as was described, is very distorted. Venezuelans never really got a say over the fact that their economy would be totally twisted around and dominated by oil. It was something very much imposed upon it, and they find themselves in the situation of how, given you've really got a very underdeveloped economy in other sectors, how do you move away from that? And they're saying, well, for the time being, we're using that oil wealth to get the ball rolling. And I think a few people in the film touch on the idea of sowing the oil, investing in agriculture, so that further down the track won't need to rely upon it.
So eventually, are they going to try and replace oil with exports of food? Is that the whole point of it?
Well, I think there's already some exporters of foods, and there's with cocoa in particular, talk about how to do that in a way that brings more money back to the country. But the talk there is food sovereignty in terms both on a local level but also a national level, like focus on domestic agriculture for the time being. I don't necessarily think it's going to rely on exports of another commodity to fund the project, but it's going to be based on the huge natural resources that Venezuela has that could be used sustainably. Like, it's a very fertile country, great rainfall. Really, it's the perfect place to be growing food. I think getting away from the corporate model, you do lose a lot of the inefficiencies that we see in our food system in Australia. We could talk more about.
How is the country perceived by her neighbours? As a good model? Is it something to look up to and follow?
It's mixed in Latin America. Like, it's Venezuela's part of what some commentators describe as a leftward progressive shift in social movements and governance in Latin America. So countries like Ecuador and Bolivia are developing similar projects in terms of food sovereignty to Venezuela. But then other countries are... an important point on that is there's a project that was touched on in the film, the ALBA, the Bolivarian Alternative for the Americas, and this maybe ties in as well in terms of food from a regional point of view. ALBA was set up as a trading network between Latin American countries as an alternative to the free trade agreement for the Americas. That was the sort of US-pushed agreement, free trade agreement. So there's a bunch of Latin American countries participating in that in terms of trading food and other goods on a sort of more level playing field.
Thank you. It's a great film. I just wanted some nuts and bolts. How long it took you to? It's quite a sophisticated argument that you've had to wrangle there with a lot of input from all over the place. Obviously, when you were there and from here, how long did it take you to make it? How much footage did you have, and how long did you spend in the edit room trying to construct your brilliant argument? Yeah, and who paid for it?
This is the filmmaker question. So the stuff that the story starts are talking about how I came to look at the Venezuelan example, and that was all before I started actually making the film. It's stuff I constructed afterwards. So the first shooting I did was in Venezuela for about 5 weeks, and then I followed that up with a bunch of interviews in Australia. So the shooting was the shortest time. The rest was spent trying to, just agonising over how to put it together. And so all in all, it took about 18 months, and most of that was trying to work out how to piece it together in the edit room or in my spare room.
Well done.
Did you get a grant or anything to do that?
No,
You self-funded that?
Yeah, it's self-funded. Well, yeah, I've got into the habit of saying that it's actually funded by the Commonwealth Bank through a credit card. But I've got a... yeah, you're right there with me all the way.
And how do people buy a copy?
Ah, well, I didn't even ask it. Yeah, they're here, $15 on DVD.
That's a really serious piece of...
Just a quick question about, obviously, if to implement something like that in Australia, and it'd be the same if you implemented it in any sort of country like the United Kingdom or in Western Europe, would involve I think it would involve a radical shift to left-wing politics. You know, I mean, a lot of things there look like Soviet-style, communal workers things, which are quite good. We've got some in the UK. But thing is, do you think there's ever going to be the political will to move that far left and implement those sorts of things, even with, say, the Green Party coalition, things like that? Do you think there's a political will to ever shift that far?
Well, I think that, you're right in that it definitely will take a political shift, and that was something that I wanted to try and get across in the film. And what are the prospects for that in Australia? Well, I mean, it's impossible to say in what way that will unfold. But I do think if you look at trends, even in the past decade, the rise of the Greens, the rise of what we can generally call the food movement. Community gardens, projects like Food Connect, which are almost like some of the projects you see in Venezuela. I think they, like what I said earlier, they're the embryo of what, a much bigger movement that's going to have to shift the status quo. And even indications of public sentiment around the supermarket chains and the way they dominate things here, and the pressure they put on both farmers and consumers. Like, I think I haven't seen the polls lately, but just my general impressions based on the news in the last couple of weeks is that people are pretty pissed off, and there is, I think it is waiting for a much bigger movement to cohere.
Wow, Simon, well done. I haven't seen it as yet, even though Simon gave me a copy of it about a month or before Christmas, and I was like, no, I want to come and see it on a bigger screen and with some people. So, wow, that's just great. I mean, particularly when you just do an interview and then he was gone, and it was like, oh God, I wonder how that's going to work out. And you actually made me look like I made some sense. So yeah, that was quite nice. No, two questions. First of all, I'm always going to go for a heart shot. What was the most emotional part for you putting this whole thing together from the time you started till you're sitting here tonight? Just, what really struck you in any part of the whole process? And the second one is, what's people's reaction been? I mean, beyond the actual project itself, but what's been the spin-off so far since you've started to release the dialogue?
the biggest impact, I think, would be killing the cynic in me that I talked about earlier. I'm not sure if that was before you got here. That cynical attitude towards community, local food and self-sufficiency and all these terms we hear thrown around. And I've got my disagreements with ways that's presented, those ideas are presented, and the way the focus of some aspects of the food movement in Australia. But yeah, essentially the cynic in me died and came to see that that general positive trend towards wanting to see a more fair and sustainable food system. So that was a fairly, in terms of politically and my ideas, that was a shift. It taught me, the other side is it taught me a lot about filmmaking. Like I really had some ideas when I started and were changed a lot. I never wanted to have my voice heard in the film, and that was a big thing that I had to get over and work out how to put a personal take on it. And then, the response, I mean, I've been going along to a bunch of screenings like this, and people are really excited by it. And I think it has different impact on different people. Like I've heard a friend in Newcastle who works in a community garden at a PCYC said that a week after the screening in Newcastle, somebody showed up who had been at the screening and was there wanting to help out. And then, other people, I think it's, switching them on more to the international picture and sort of the activist side of, the injustices in the food system. That's been great. There's, different people screening it, selling a bunch of copies. So, hopefully that example, like Venezuela, but also that type of example is going to be discussed more. We'll see it popping up as an example that's referred to, like we've come to refer to the permaculture movement in Cuba, which many of us know about and would have been talking about for the last 5 years or so.
Have you offered this to, say, like the ABC or one of the television channels?
I haven't directly as yet. I've just sort of been just focused on the sort of distribution amongst these sort of networks. But I was thought, great, go to SBS. They'll love that it's got Costa in it. And then I read in the paper that that might not be the case. No, but I'm... but actually I do hope to speak to SBS. I might have to do a bit of a different cut, make it shorter and fit it in with what, with their time slots or whatever, but I hope to.
Like Dick Smith to give you that little bit of, not push, but he's got the context, because he's getting all kinds of weird stuff on TV now. I'm not sure if I want to. Well, it had occurred. My next project is looking at stuff happening in Cowra as a case study, a more Australian case study, and Dick Smith has been sort of saying a lot about things there. So I guess it's a possibility, but I don't want to be caught up with a populationist.
It's very approachable.
Yeah,
it's really good.
I know for me, watching the film was a great mind expander in terms of being involved here with the garden on Saturdays and with the dinners and the Food Connect here, and then having the political and economic framework put around something which we can relate to that's happening over there. So, I feel very excited about the larger perspective that I've got. Does anybody else want to say something? Because I know Lance would also then like to elaborate on a few things.
I just want to be really quick. You should all...
When you were interviewing the local people and the communities in Venezuela, did you run into any trouble or people that didn't want to talk to you?
Most of it was I was with a group of Australian and American researchers, PhD students, academics, who were investigating this same sort of stuff. So I guess we found ourselves in situations where, we seek out positive projects that we, thought were showing a good example. So in that way, we have very receptive audience. And then also, as well as that, part of it I was doing it on my own and just trying to seek out contacts, and mostly that was also fine, but there are a couple of moments where things just, partly through communication breakdowns, don't go as well as you hope. And in particular in that cocoa producing region, it's actually an area that was the focus of a BBC documentary series about this British entrepreneur who set up a cocoa farm and then was kicked out because he wasn't paying his workers very well. And there was a lot of, I think I encountered some of the legacy of tension over that. But, when I was able to make clear what I was doing, that was all cool. Yeah.